Everybody, this is Gaynor Meilke from Charisma Inc., and this is the Moving the Needle YouTube series, and I'm joined with John Higgins. Hi, John.
Hi, Gaynor. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, so Moving the Needle, the reason why John and I decided that we wanted to do a YouTube series was to provide some objective insights and education on tools and technologies and different types of solutions to help you move your firm to the next level and to move the needle, especially around technology, because that's such a game changer for firms. And the first two episodes that we've done have focused around AI, and because that is, sort of the tech of the moment, and I think it's going to be the tech of the next hundreds of years. Don't you think, John?
I do believe that's the case. Yeah, it's here to stay.
It
It is
is
here.
here to stay. We were just saying there's like really no turning back now. And we hope that AI is going to be used for good. And that's what the topic of today's episode is around large learning models and LLMs. So, John, I'm going to be picking your brain on this one today to start off with. What is an LLM and how does it apply to accounting?
Okay, well, let's get to it then. So, if you watch some of our previous videos here in this channel, we talked about the different types of AI, generative AI, and so forth. So generative AI is where all the action is today, and generative AI is built on top of a foundation of what's called an LLM, large language model. So I do a lot of presentations on this, and so I want to bring up a slide. It's going to be a little technical, but the good thing is it's a YouTube, so you can go back and watch it a couple times if you need to. But I think if you understand all the content that I'm going to walk you through on this slide, then by the time we get to the end of that conversation, you'll have a good foundation of awareness of how generative AI works. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen here and bring that up. Okay, so generative AI and large language models. So I just want to walk through how a large language model is built, and then we can talk about, of course, how it's used. Well, maybe we start with how it's used first. So when you have a large language model and you have an application like ChatGPT, kind of the user interface, it's very simple. You type in a prompt, what is it you want to ask it? And then that prompt that you type in gets processed by the large language model, and the large language model then generates, that's why I call it generative AI, it generates a response, it generates output back to you. So what's in that large language model? How is it going about creating a response to my prompt? Well, it all starts, the first point in making an LLM is to have a data set. And a data set, and I'm going to use ChatGPT as the example, but they all work and are developed in a very similar format, but it just makes it easier just to kind of use that as the example. So when OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, created their large language model, they went out and they basically scraped the internet for as much data as they could possibly get. Now think about that. Think about how much data is out there on the World Wide Web. There's a lot. You have websites, you have digital documents, digital books, video. Think of all the content just on YouTube alone, and then audio, all the posts in X, formerly Twitter, all the posts in Facebook. Now, whether all that content is not necessarily part of ChatGPT's large language model, but just to give you some perspective of the amount of data in the data set. When ChatGPT was released in 2022, it had the equivalent of about, they call them tokens, so it's not actually exactly a one-to-one reference to a word, but they had 750 billion tokens. You and I can kind of think of it as words, the equivalent of words in the data set. 750 billion written words that were scraped off the internet. Within a year, when ChatGPT came out with version 4, they had a new data set. That data set was twice as large, 1.5 trillion words of content. That's
So I have a,
content in those various forms. Gaynor?
so I have a question then. is it discriminating in what it's scraping off the internet? Like, how is it scraping it off the internet?
Is it discriminating in terms of what's good and what's bad? No,
Yeah.
it's just grabbing the information. Okay, just like you or I would grab the information, went out to the
Okay.
websites, right? I mean, isn't that one of the challenges we have in society today? People are going out and they're just
Yes.
reading false information. But that's another topic for another one of our videos. So no, it's not discriminating. It's just pulling the content off. Well, I shouldn't. I'm going to kind of come back to answer your question a little bit more
Okay.
effectively. So that creates that data set. So they went from 750 billion within a year. The new data set was double that, 1.5 trillion words of content. So it could be like the Bibles from different religions, the Quran. It could be, all these digital books that are out there. And of course, there's a copyright issue, which we're going to talk about that. But that's where it all starts. You have this big, that's why they call it large, big set of data, and we call it a data set, not a database. As CPAs, we're accustomed to working with databases, very structured data, right?
Yeah.
Columns and rows of data, like in our accounting systems, our sales transaction files and such. This is not structured data. This is unstructured data in different forms. That's why they call it multimodal. It can understand or accept video, audio,
Mm.
text, and so on. So that's the starting point. You got this big data set, and then what happens is it gets trained. What does that mean? Well, this is where the really sophisticated software technology comes into play. That in the case of OpenAI with ChatGPT, they have these very sophisticated algorithms that are just analyzing that data set. And they're analyzing it to try to find patterns of words, how words are used, how words are strung together, just really to understand the nature of how that content is developed. And just to give you a perspective, that training process of 1.5 trillion words or tokens is, if I get this correct, I think it's about $100 million endeavor.
Wow.
It's not cheap to do that training, to have the data infrastructure, the data center with the processors, all the NVIDIA processors. You all know about NVIDIA and how successful they've been. They are the primary chip provider that provides the computing power that can take those large data sets and analyze them. And so then what happens is when you put in your words in your prompt, it processes them against the data set, against the large language model. And all it's doing is predicting the response.
Mm.
Okay, so one of the ways I heard it described is just think of a large language model as a calculator for words. So it's really mind-blowing when you think about that. All it's really doing when you type in a prompt and it starts giving you back output, it's just predicting what that output should be. That's why it may not be accurate. It may be hallucinating, as they say, which just means it's a totally wrong answer to the output. But as a simple example, if I type in, finish this sentence, Jack and Jill ran up the, and I type that as my prompt, it's most likely going to come back with the hill. Jack and Jill ran up the hill. Is that the right answer? I don't know. It might be right because that's what we all hear, but it could be Jack and Jill ran up the road or Jack and Jill ran up the mountain. But drawing on this database or data set of all this written content is why it would predict that it's Jack and Jill ran up the hill. Okay, so that's
So
the training process.
I
Question?
can't help but think about parallel with people getting their news and political information off Facebook and using that as their data set to make decisions. You know, all of this with the large learning model, like when I bring it back into the accounting realm, has some margin for error if we're trying to use it to, for advisory or to get answers necessarily to like a compliance issue. Would you say that's true right now?
You're absolutely accurate there. And in our future series, we'll talk about the risks associated with it and this concept of hallucinations and when I've identified different ways to use this in a CPA practice. Some are really low risk applications, some are high risk applications. So we'll definitely be getting to that down the road in our series here. Okay, so now you have these algorithms have trained the large language model by processing that data set. Then what you have is a process called fine tuning. Okay, so what fine tuning is to try to make it better, try to make it more accurate, try to be discriminate in the way what information it provides. So there's different types of fine tuning, and it's primarily an automated process, but there is also some what they call human supervised fine tuning. And so, for example, think about all that written content in the data set, how much bias is in there, right? If you're reading content, say from a Muslim versus content from a Christian, obviously they're going to have the religious biases, and we know all the biases. I mean, we have infinite biases in our lives, but I mean, you got the major ones: racial bias, gender bias, political bias, right? So they fine tune it to try to modify how the training process worked, so that when it accepts input, it's going to put a filter on it. So, for example, if you go into ChatGPT and say, "Tell me how I can make a bomb with materials at the local hardware store," it's going to say, "We can't do that. It's against our acceptable use policy." That's fine tuning. Okay, but that's just because OpenAI and ChatGPT, that's their philosophy, right? But you could have somebody else that would not have that philosophy and would leave all the filters off, and it would tell you exactly how to build a bomb and what materials to buy at the hardware store. So the same thing with the bias removal. And so what happens now is you get humans kind of inserting their beliefs and their ethics and so forth into it. And so, well, who made them king, right? So how do we know to trust their bias removal? A classic example is Google Gemini back in the early part of this year, 2024. They came out with an update to Google Gemini which generated images. And a user said, "Generate for me an image of the founding fathers of America," and it came back with people of color. All the images were people of color, and so they immediately shut it down. They said, well, they overtuned it, right? They were trying to remove, I guess, the racial sensitivity, and so then when it generated the images, because it didn't know, it's just an application, and it came out with that. Another form of training is user feedback. If you ever use one of these applications, at the end of the output, it has thumbs up or thumbs down. So if you think that you typed in a prompt and you got output that was not really that good, you put the thumb down, it takes that and goes back and tries to figure out why it gave a bad response to the input. Okay, and then the third, yeah, go ahead.
I just said, don't we wish everybody would do that, right? Like,
exactly.
thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah. And then the third example of fine tuning is industry specific content. So kind of gets back to your point about it could really give you bad results for something about a tax compliance issue or whatever. Well, you could take an LLM, and this is happening as we speak. Now we're seeing this go to the next generation where companies are taking this and they're kind of white labeling a version of, say, ChatGPT's LLM, and now they're going to load it up with industry specific information. So like in the medical field, they would fine tune it and really add all the different like diagnostic codes that are used in the medical field, maybe the insurance terminology and things like that, the nomenclature, so that it will do a better job in answering questions about the medical field. The medical field. You could do the same thing with the tax. Let's go back to our CPA community here. Is that you could fine tune it with like the Internal Revenue Code. So now that large language model, in addition to having all that content in the data set, now it's been fine tuned to have the Internal Revenue Code in there, which would again get it in a better position to be able to accurately answer questions about taxes in that regard.
Well, I know, just to like put a practical example, and again, we're keeping this agnostic on solution providers. Nobody's like paying to like be talked about on this.
Yeah.
episode. But I know with Canopy, with the practice management solution, they're using AI to help firms be able to ask questions about specific clients and then be able to get, you know, the answers to different questions about the client back to them. And so basically it's using the information that a firm has based on all the transactions with a particular client, that's a data set, to get that information without having to like do reports and things like that. So, or they can build reports that will automatically generate those queries, so it's already in, some solutions. I know that's just like one example. But that industry specific piece is going to be crucial in the accounting profession to have tools that can be trusted. And I think that's like an important piece, and I know we'll talk about in a future episode, is just, you know, how can you start to build confidence that you can use these types of tools to be more productive without risking your reputation with, it's, as you said, there's low risk getting your feet wet into like the full swim, which I don't think anybody's doing right now.
Right. Although I have to tell you, I was at a conference at Auburn University a few weeks ago, and one of the presenters was a partner with PwC, and he was showing how they're using LLMs at PwC, and I was blown away, because I've been spending the last 2 years to learn about this and talk about it, and so they're putting it to work at a very high level throughout that firm. It's pretty incredible, actually, the how far they've come to integrate this into their audit functions and so on. So
Wow,
it's yeah, but
that
the
might be
larger
a
things
whole
have
other
that benefit.
episode. There you
Pardon
go.
me?
That's probably a whole nother episode.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I know we talked about getting some interview folks on with us.
Yeah.
Boy, if I could get that gentleman on, that would be awesome.
Okay. Well, we'll get to work on that.
Yeah. Right
Excellent.
on. Okay, so then just to kind of finish up with this, there's another piece to this large language model. It's called retrieval augmented generation, RAG. Okay, remember I told you, I warned you this is gonna be a little technical, but if you understand all this, then you're well on your way to having a good foundational knowledge about how
Okay.
these things work. Okay, so what is RAG? Well, RAG is when you, as part of your prompt, bring in additional information. Okay, so we talked in a previous segment about can I upload a client tax return and have generative AI analyze it? And the answer is yes. Now, there's ways to do that to make sure you ensure the privacy of the client data. But if I go in and I type in my prompt, I say, give me 10 recommendations for reducing the tax burden next year, and I upload the tax return, that's RAG content. Retrieval, because I'm retrieving the tax return, augmented generation. So now it's going to provide my answer, not just based upon the data in the data set, but more specifically, it's going to base the response upon the data in the actual tax return. So this concept of RAG is what really allows you to get to that next step, Gaynor, that you were talking about, where we can have more confidence in the accuracy. So some examples of what would be RAG? Well, the Internal Revenue Code. So I actually tried to do this with ChatGPT 4. I went out to the website, the IRS website, and downloaded the whole Internal Revenue Code. The problem is the file was too big, so I couldn't use it as part of my prompt. Okay, there's limits to what I don't want to get too technical, but they call it the context window. How much content can you put into your prompt? What you type, as well as RAG content you bring in. Well, GPT version 4, ChatGPT 4, could not handle the Internal Revenue Code file that I downloaded. It was just too big. But I, as sure as we're here today, I gotta believe that GPT version 5 will be expanded to take a file the size of the Internal Revenue Code. So,
Wow.
and when I get to that point, then now my confidence level's gone way up because I'm asking a question specifically about the Internal Revenue Code.
Yeah.
Or the other example we just talked about, the RAG content could be a completed tax return. Or maybe it's both of them. Maybe it's both of them where I'm asking a question about the tax return and it's going and looking directly at the Internal Revenue Code file.
Mhm.
When we talk about Microsoft Copilot, what makes it unique is Microsoft 365 Copilot. The RAG is kind of what you're talking about with Canopy, Gaynor.
Yeah.
The RAG content is everything in your Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So I use
Wow.
SharePoint to store all my presentations. If I go to conferences as an attendee, I download all the PDF files that are for the entire conference, even for the sessions I didn't go to, and I can upload those as part of RAG, and I can say, okay, this is a 3-day conference. Give me a 10 bullet summary of the key points of each of the 50 sessions.
Wow.
And all of a
Yeah,
sudden I
that's
have,
power.
yeah, I mean, it's just as a tool to summarize, but I feel very confident in what it's given me because I've told it to pull that data out of the actual presentations, not generating just from the overall data set.
That's awesome. So I use Copilot, but I also use Gemini because we store so much in Google. And so definitely that's like that's a great tip. Well, I'll try,
Yeah, I mean,
right? When you go to
that's where it's going.
conferences, take all that information and really get those high level takeaways so that you can go and apply it. And I think that's also, where we're sort of at in a in accounting firm world and with these LLMs is to start using it to be able to create that, like, the context window that you said, like, so that you're essentially fine tuning so that you can make these tools more reliable on the things that you need them to be reliable on as well. So
Exactly.
it's kind of trial and error and fine tuning all together. Sounds
Yeah,
like.
and it's kind of like self fine tuning is the way you kind of described it there. That's a good
Mhm.
way to put it, actually. And so then what's happening in our next recording, we're going to talk about kind of where the future of these LLMs is going, and that's exactly what's happening. Is that these examples of RAG content are being baked into the model itself from the beginning. They don't need to be uploaded at it. So we'll talk more about that in our next chat. But so hopefully that wasn't too technical and gives everybody a little bit of an understanding of how this works. Now, when they go through the training process, it's important to understand it's at a point in time. So
Mm.
like ChatGPT 3.5, scrape the internet to build the data set. And I forget the date. I think it was January of 21. Don't quote me on that. And then when they came out with version 4, it was a new data set, went through a new training process. And what does that mean? Well, the data set is only up to a certain point in time. So it's not current. I think ChatGPT 4, as an example, has been trained as of April of 2023. Yeah, April 2023. So it doesn't necessarily know who won the 2024 Super Bowl, right? Because that happened after
For the
that.
Olympics or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. How However, when you look at my examples of RAG, you can tell it to go out and look at the internet too. So if you, even though it was only trained through April of 2023, I could say, go out and use the internet, use the web to identify who won the 2024 Super Bowl,
Hmm.
as an example.
Yeah, so that's the way you get around some of that. But
Yeah,
again, it's just taking this back to the practical level and how to move the needle with it in a firm. It sounds like, again, starting to basically fine tune your own queries. First step, which we kind of covered in our first two chats there, are getting started with it and learning about, which applications you might want to use. I like Copilot, I like Gemini, but I use them both. Uh, what I'm doing now is really looking at what jobs they do best, right? Like
yeah,
it's, as a content writer and an author at heart, like, anything that's generated, I'm like, yeah, this is good basic information, but I haven't used it. I actually, to your example of that you used at the end of our last episode on with the kids' stories, I actually
yeah.
do write children's books. That's something I do. I haven't done that yet with ChatGPT or anything like that, but I might start looking into that and seeing if it meets my standards. And I think the standards that accountants hold themselves to, rightly so, is not going to be matched yet by some of these tools. And then there's the whole client facing piece of it, which we've touched on before, is you know, how can we start fine tuning the information so that it's something that's going to add value to the client relationship and not damage it too? 'Cause I think
Yeah.
there's positives and negatives for sure.
Yeah, one way to look at it is it's a staff assistant. It's an intern. It's a, and it's, do you take everything an intern or staff assistant would create for you and generate and just pass it on to the client? No, you review it, you add to it, you edit it, and the same thing kind of applies here. It's not going to do everything for you, but it can certainly be a good helper.
Definitely. All right. Well, hopefully that's moving the needle forward. I know I learned a lot about the LLMs. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And we spent this episode specifically on that because I think it's a great primer so that you can then understand and be an informed user of the technology. Like, what exactly is this, instead of just taking verbatim, like, oh, I'm just going to use this and see what comes out. Now you know what actually is being looked at, and the fact that there's, unless you fine tune for sort of like that static context window, then with having the query of the World Wide Web, like you have to understand that it's a limited data set. Every time like there's a new release, it's getting better or it's getting
Yeah.
more current. And so that's particularly informational in a world of accounting where things, are changing all the time, right? So we can't just say ChatGPT find this for us when ChatGPT is working 12 months behind, anything that's been, published from the IRS or other, bodies more recently. So I think that is a big takeaway from today. I think the, if you're going to start using these generative tools to help you do some of the legwork in your practice.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, great. Well, in the next chat, we're going to really talk more about the generative AI and what's coming down the pike as well. So
Yeah,
that
yeah, it'll be
I'm
interesting.
it will be, because I'm curious to see how you think all of that is going to impact accounting firms like in the next couple of years.
All right, well, we'll look forward to that one.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for tuning in, everybody.
Thanks, Gaynor. Thanks, everyone.